There's a little bird that's been causing some big problems around the world. The Twitter bird. The Twitter bird allegedly elected Barack Obama. The Twitter bird allegedly toppled the Hosni Mubarak regime in Egypt. The Twitter bird allegedly damaged your parliament. What is this Twitter bird? I get to work and do campaigns for a living, for private companies, for industries, and in the old days, for candidates and parties. And the first thing they all want to know now, can we do it on Twitter? We don't need to buy ads anymore. We don't need employees. We don't need to do any of the hard work we used to do. We just need to figure out a Twitter strategy. And what I'll say to them is what I want to share with you today. If the theme of this conference is the next level, you're all involved in advocating issues, maybe working for or against parties or candidates, maybe selling products, maybe building a business. And what I want to leave you with is the one idea that Twitter is not enough. It's a very valuable tool, but it's not the basis of getting to the next level. It's one tool that's eating up so much attention, people are forgetting everything else. Now, I'm not going to deny the amazing difference in effect of using mobile technology. There are more people connected to the mobile world today than own a toothbrush. The mobile phone is a more ubiquitous device than that of a toothbrush, all inside of about a decade. This is a frightening pace of change. So what is this thing, Twitter? Well, it's a child. Twitter is 6 years old. In just that 6-year period, Twitter has managed to gain 100 million users. Now, 100 million out of that 4.8 billion people connected to our mobile and internet infrastructure. That's not a huge population of people, but these tweeters are pretty important. Who are they? Well, they're younger, they're more urban, they're more educated, they have higher than average incomes. So what does that mean? It means the Twitter conversation doesn't always represent the public conversation. Twitter might be a great opinion-leading forum, but it's not always a great indication of what we need to do if our goal is convincing the public to come along with us, with an idea or with a product. In fact, these young Twitter people are very mobile as well. 55% of Twitter use is now exclusively on mobile device. But we must read about Twitter so much there must be some good reason everyone's talking about it. Why is it a good thing? Why has it been such a powerful tool? Well, number one, the media seem to believe it's incredibly effective. Therefore, it is. These revolutions, these social change movements, these suddenly exploding young, exciting candidates, it must be Twitter that made that happen because that's the easiest explanation. Well, I made this slide cheap and easy like Twitter. It doesn't take long to set up a Twitter account. You don't need a Twitter consultant. I wish you did. Some of us could probably make a lot more money as Twitter consultants. Twitter is fast, it's immediate, it's urgent, it speaks to people, it forces you to economize your language. Twitter has really no barrier to entry. What else do we like about Twitter? Well, Twitter can be uniquely funny. It can take on some voices. I think many of you might be following the US election from afar. Two of my favorite Twitter accounts, each of which has been reported in mainstream media, have more than 10,000 followers, one of which is some people who criticize Barack Obama like to say that he speaks through his teleprompter, that he doesn't actually have an opinion of his own, it's whatever comes up on the screen in front of him. So some enterprising person started a Twitter account for Barack Obama's teleprompter, and it comments every day about what it's telling the boss to say. And those people who want to make fun of Mitt Romney want to make fun of the fact that he's got lots of money. In fact, his wife owns a horse that competed in the Olympics named Rafalka. And now there's a Twitter account for Rafalka Romney. The horse is commenting on how the boss is doing every day. And the media think it's funny, and Twitter allows us to take on these extraordinary voices. You may have seen Clint Eastwood, famous Hollywood actor, did a very controversial speech at the Republican National Convention talking to a chair. It was only 7 minutes after he'd started his speech before the chair had its own Twitter account. And it was in the New York Times, and it was on CNN. So Twitter provides us a fast and easy opportunity to create a very comedic voice. Why else has Twitter been associated with democratic change, with social change, with fairly landmark campaigns that have happened around the world? It's hard to catch people on Twitter. It's an activist tool. I use some old imagery here, not in reference to a Moldovan communist party, but of a symbol of old authoritarian and totalitarian regimes. For those people who are legitimately dissidents, fighting powerful forces where it's dangerous to be campaigning, Twitter's proved to be mobile and anonymous and useful to them. But if we're launching a big campaign, and we're starting here in Moldova, and we're using Twitter, let's first acknowledge it's a small pool of people. It's a small pool of a certain type of people. And I'll share with you a secret as a result of some voluminous research I did before coming here this weekend. Moldova is small. So if we take a small section of the population and we go into a small market, what do we end up with? A very small population of people. It's not necessarily the best tool for broad-based campaigning, for reaching a broad public audience, particularly for reaching those who are less urban, who are less connected, who are less educated, who have less income. So what do we do as an alternative? Well, you could always just go on television. We could always just reach into our big bag of money and develop a very fancy television advertising campaign and be on television every night of the week, because that's clearly the most dominant medium here. But we don't all have that kind of money. We don't all have those sorts of resources. And maybe people wouldn't find that as the most credible way for us to reach them. The good news is there are other tools. But here's the one warning that I want to deliver. The reason why Twitter is not enough. It's the danger of slacktivism. What is slacktivism? It's confusing a click or a share or a retweet with actually doing something. Sometimes when we think, well, you know, I shared the material, I put it on my Facebook, I gave it to a bunch of people, we talked about it for 2 days, it seemed really important for that period of time, I've contributed to the cause. Have you really? Have you really made a difference or contributed to reaching a broader audience or mobilizing people around an idea? Slacktivism is dangerous because people are already less engaged than they have been in recent history. Fewer people attend regular church services. Fewer people are members of clubs that meet regularly. Fewer people show up at events and rallies than they used to. Fewer of us are willing to engage in that direct behavior that forces us off of our sofa, out of our home, into the cold night, to go show up when someone needs us, or to gather together in places at a regular time. What do? Well, we stay in the comfort of our homes, and we think that those clicks replace us leaving and contributing more directly. They don't. A great example of this is the Kony 2012 campaign. I don't know how many here have heard of it. It was very, very, very big for a very short period of time. A group called Invisible Children, which wanted to campaign and raise awareness about a man named Joseph Kony, an indicted war criminal who uses child soldiers in Uganda. He's the head of something called the Lord's Resistance Army. They made a very compelling 27-minute video. It was viewed 91 million times. It was a prelude to an even bigger campaign where, after watching the video, the organizers wanted people to go out and put up posters that they'd made themselves in their neighborhood 1 month later. So in March, they get 90 million views, and everyone's Facebook feed is full of this video, and everyone's reading about it on Twitter, and everyone's talking about it. Then a month later, the action part comes along, the posters, and no one did it. The slacktivists didn't leave their houses. There's a poster here mocking the Kony campaign that says phony 2012, because it turned out not to reach those objectives. So what do we do instead? Imagine that all those smart and interesting Twitter accounts are real people you can access to sell your product, to advance your issue campaign, to work to support or oppose a political party or political candidate here in Moldova. Well, the first real decision we have to make, The first acknowledgement is that the universe is always half the size we think it is. Because the minute we're going to advance a proposition, there's likely an equal number of people who will oppose it, who are simply either uninterested or, for some reason, opposed to what we want to do. Then we've got to acknowledge that the population of people available to us aren't homogeneous. They'll have different motivations. They'll have different skill and aptitude levels. They'll want to do different things. And we're selfish because we're organizers. We've got to actually get the product introduced. We've got to actually win a campaign. We've got to get our issue campaign out there. We have an objective, and we have to be ruthless about it. So the first thing is, the minute you look at that pool of people that's available to you that previously was just a stream on Twitter, we have to say, what can they do for us? What task are we willing to assign to each of them individually or in small groups? Well, let's look at them through the lens of what they can do for us. Maybe they're people who can do work online, who can organize meetings, who can make phone calls, who can engage in some task. It could be, you know, in North America, the proverbial lowest level volunteer task on every campaign is stuffing envelopes, because there's always mail to go out. So who are the people who are going to sit in the room and stuff the thousands of envelopes? There are lots of tasks. But we have to break our campaign away from the abstract goals, the very noble things we want to accomplish, into the specific things that have to get done. We want to group people together around those functional tasks and let them decide the best way to do it. Give them some autonomy to push forward. They are activists. That means they've shown up. They are gold. Treat your activists like you would treat your family or an honored guest. Feed them, respect them, thank them, reward them, because we need to mobilize around our goals. And activists are the first necessary ingredient. Now, mobilization or campaign planning or strategic planning being executed, well, there are lots of people who make millions of dollars selling complicated books on how to do it. I'm going to try and share with you what I think is the simplest recipe to mobilizing activists toward a goal today. It's the one when I write a plan for a client now, I jot it on the top of the corner of every page and remember this simple path forward. It's really about 4 ingredients. The first is your idea. What is the motivating idea pushing you forward? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? Can you advance it? Can you explain that idea to your grandmother? Can you explain it to your neighbor who hates politics? Can you explain it to someone who otherwise never reads the news and doesn't know much about anything? That's the first step. Is your idea are you clearly able to communicate it? Second ingredient, shouldn't surprise you, it's time. We all have an equal amount of time. Time is the #1 variable in all planning, because if we're going to execute a campaign, it's how we use that time. If you're planning for a political goal or a product launch, pick a date in the future and plan backwards. How much work has to get done between now and then? And break it down to the individual task that can be completed by the individual activists in your team. Thirdly is money. Here's the bad news. We never have enough. And particularly if the issue is important, then there's never any money at all. The other good news, big money almost never wins alone. If it did, we'd all be sitting here in branded clothing because the corporations would be paying us to be here today. Right? We wouldn't do anything independently. We wouldn't be a bunch of young professionals sitting here on a Sunday having paid to listen to lectures all day. Right? The power of a good idea does move people forward. So don't be discouraged by a lack of money. It's ubiquitous in a good campaign. And finally are people. People are those activists, and they're the audience we're trying to reach. Now there's a trick here, because the people we're trying to reach are bombarded with information every day. Social media, which we've talked about, earned media, the press, paid media, advertising thrown at them. But if you sit down with anyone who reaches the public on a regular basis, they'll tell you if we could afford it, we'd pay people to knock on every door individually. And that's all we would pay to do. Why? Because direct engagement is still the most effective form of communication and persuasion. A person talking to a person who looks like them. A person who maybe they already know, engaging them. That is the basis of actual social change campaigns. Now, what does that mean? To engage in direct engagement is personalized and it's individual. I'm going to phone you. I'm going to write you a letter. I'm going to visit your house. I'm going to stop you on the corner of the street and engage you in a conversation. I'm going to give you an opportunity to reply. It is not a mass medium of communication. It's labor intensive, and it's why we need so many activists and why we need them so disciplined in terms of planning. There's a second challenge when you engage in direct engagement. That is, every message, every issue that should just be that one tweet, that 140 characters going in one direction, is a conversation. And we need to make sure we've examined our message and see if it survives as an argument, meaning someone having the opposite view and asking us questions. How do we do that? It's the simple adversarial method of developing a message. We need to know 4 things. What are we saying about ourselves? What are we saying about our opponents? What are they saying about themselves? What is a persuadable person going to hear from us and someone who thinks the opposite of what we think? And finally, what are they going to say about us? Are we ready to respond to any accusations on our motivation for advancing a product, an issue, a candidate, or a party? That is direct engagement communications, and then there's the last ingredient, the secret sauce, the thing people forget to do because they think they're too polite, and that's a call to action. We can never end a communication without asking someone for something, to do something, to give us something, to commit to something, to engage in action themselves. The call to action is really superseded only by, if we're organizers, somebody has to write this down somewhere. Somebody actually has to keep a list. Someone has to issue reminders. Someone has to remember that we discussed that at the last meeting, so we don't have to discuss it again this time. A little bit of administration goes an awful long way. You might want to use, like Barack Obama's team does, an online tool like Nation Builder or an online campaign tool. I still like a piece of paper on a clipboard. That is a mobilization plan. That is a campaign plan to advance an issue. Why? Because we still need to engage in person-to-person communications, activist-driven, if you want to persuade people to do something for you or to agree with your proposition. Margaret Mead, the noted cultural anthropologist, said it better than I ever could, that the only reason we have to have faith in this is because it is the only method that has ever affected any degree of social change in the world. With that, I will say, to prove this isn't an anti-Twitter speech, you can reach me on Twitter. And there have been lots of pictures taken today. I'm going to take a picture of all of you, if you don't mind, to end today, to put it on Twitter, because if you've listened to anything I've said, I hope you're left with one thought. It's actually about all of you who've made the investment to do this and go forward. It's not about the commitment to give a lecture or intelligently dig deeply into one issue. It's the degree for each of us to stand up and take responsibility and go out and engage others on that which we feel is important. With that, thank you very much.